Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and I know I've been away recently studying hard and releasing remastered episodes of the back catalogue of the podcast. But this week, I am so happy to say that I have a new interview for you. This week, I'm chatting with Kate Amber, a graduate of the Psychology of Coercive Control program at Salford University. The same course that I'm currently studying on, as I'm sure you are all familiar with by now. If you are still listening during my absent period, I just want to say a massive thank you to each of you. And I also want to give a special shout out to all the patrons who are still supporting the podcast and interacting on the platform at www.patreon.com/thecultvault. You patrons are keeping me bolstered during these trying months of study. I'm so pleased to be releasing this episode this week. Here is the inspirational Kate Amber. So hello, Kate, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today about yourself, your work, and all of the amazing resources that you are putting out into the world at the moment regarding the massive topic that is coercive control. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
So I am the founder and CEO of End Coercive Control USA, also called ACUSA. And I hold a master's degree in the psychology of coercive control from the University of Salford, where you are also attending. And I hope that you are going to enjoy that program as much as I did. I also developed my own model of coercive control called the quicksand model. And so I do speaking, training, consulting, and I work with clients who are, for the most part, they're clients who are going through the family court system, and they are embroiled in a custody battle with a coercive controller. And so I often also do expert witness testimony in both civil and criminal and family cases, mostly family cases. And then another piece of my business that I'm expanding on is turnarounds for corporations and organizations that would like to reduce the coercive control that's occurring within their organizations.
It's a very niche space to be working in around the subject of coercive control. I think it feels bigger to me at the moment because of the course that I'm doing and the space within the cult podcast realm that talks a lot about coercive control. As we know, they go hand in hand. So how is it that you come to be the founder and CEO of an organization that targets coercive and controlling behavior with an aim to end it? That's such a niche position, I think.
Yes, and of course, it's not a very large goal, is it? Right, to end coercive control worldwide. So yes, I am an idealist. I admit it, but I came to this work from my lived experience of coercive control. I was unaware of what was happening to me in my relationship, and I was aware of domestic violence. I understood physical violence and how there are also other things that people that domestic violence offenders use other than physical violence. But everything that I read and studied on domestic violence did not seem to fully incorporate the pattern of behavior that I found myself dealing with. And so coming out of that relationship, I embarked on a journey to figure out what the hell happened, right? So first, I ran across Evan Stark's book, who his book, Coercive Control and How Men Entrap Women in Personal Life, or I'm not sure if it's personal or private life, but his book was absolutely eye-opening for me. And I finished that book and I went, okay, that's it right there. That's it. And so then I started trying to find, okay, who else has information on this? At the same time that was occurring, I was also working, I was studying at the University of Pennsylvania in the Ortner Center for violence and abuse prevention. And so I was getting a postgraduate certification there while I was discovering this new terminology of coercive control. And so I went searching for, okay, well, where can I get a degree? And I assumed there was going to be all these places, right? I'm expecting a long list of places where I can go choose from. Well, the University of Salford is it. Internationally, that's the organization, that's the university that has a master's degree. And so I went for it. And it really, really expanded my understanding of coercive control. And in that program, as you know, we don't just study coercive control inside of domestic violence, which of course Stark's viewpoint is that they're sort of synonymous. Coercive control and domestic violence are sort of the same thing, or domestic abuse are the same thing. And I don't disagree that they're the same thing, but I would say that coercive control happens in a lot of other places. And the more I look at this pattern, and I call coercive control the pattern of fear, force, or fraud used to dominate someone else. And so for me, it doesn't have to be inside of a family or inside of a group. It can be anywhere as long as the pattern of behavior is there. And so if there are multiple tactics being used to dominate someone, then that's coercive control. But I'm not sure if I answered your question.
My mind is going in so many different directions right now. I think that Stark's contribution to the understanding of coercive control has really changed the way that coercive control is understood, perceived, looked at, investigated. I think it's really amazing from your personal experiences to be able to identify that coercive control was your personal experience, the same way that I had the kind of researcher experience of looking at cults. The moment of, oh, that's it, happened to me when I started to understand coercive control at a deeper level and realized that things like fear, force, and fraud, the silver line that goes through all of these different groups. I always talk about the hallmarks of cult-like or destructive groups being similar, and that's how we're able to identify destructive groups and cults. We're able to look at the frameworks that exist from various experts, but there's something that occurs within every interview where I think this is so similar to this and this and this and this and this and this, and I'm like, what is it? And I had that moment one day where I was like, it's coercive control. And I think it's quite incredible that people are having those personal experiences and professional experiences, and those things are coming together to create bodies of work like the ones that you have created. And to be able to find that, I want to say, validation through the Salford course, and understanding that deeper and realizing that coercive control is something that absolutely happens across spaces universally, especially in places like businesses, which is what's really exciting about some of the work that you're doing. It's an interesting course. It's a tough course, but it is eye-opening. And I'm so excited to hear about everything else that you have been able to pull together just from opening Stark's book to talking to me here today. So when you enrolled in the Salford course, was this COVID time?
It was. And as a matter of fact, it was the one good thing that came out of COVID for me, was that I was able to take I was able to start the master's degree. And I started off with the certification. My plan was not to get the full master's degree. I was just going to get there's 3 different versions. You can get the certification, or you can get the diploma or the master's degree. And I thought, I just need the certification. But by the time I had taken the very first course, I was so hooked on learning more because every speaker they brought in and every class we had, I quite literally was having aha moments through every single class in every topic, right? Which is odd because it's not like I was a human trafficking victim, but I would, the human trafficking person comes in and speaks, and then the sports person comes in and I go, "Oh, wow, this looks like a martial arts group that I was in." And then the cult people come in and I go, "Oh, wow, that personal development group that I was so gung ho about, and that once I was removed from it, I started to see what was going on, but not to the level that I learned once I started diving into the different models and all the, the 70, 80 years of research that we went through and that I then took and synthesized into my quicksand model. So it was exciting, and it was re-traumatizing at the same time, right? Like I would get triggered by things and then I would go and I'd process for hours and days. And it was an amazing, eye-opening and worldview expanding experience.
The quicksand model that you've developed, was this something that came out of your project and dissertation for the Salford course, or something that came after?
Well, so that's funny that you asked that because I created the model while I was in the program, but it was not connected to the program. I was doing some speaking, and I was scheduled to speak as a keynote speaker on one conference in Washington State, and then as a speaker for the International Coercive Control Conference. And what I was really doing was looking for a way to take what you and I know to be an incredibly nuanced and complex issue and somehow boil it down into a presentation that I could give in 30 minutes. And so what I was doing was, okay, how can I make this simple? And for those presentations, I came up with some alliterations, some, words that start with the same letter to make it easy for people to remember. So like I came up with my doubles and Darvo. I've got the double standards, double binds, double team, like this whole list of doubles and Darvo. And then I've got the E's and I've got the F's and the, force, fear, and fraud. Those are easy to remember, right? So that was what I was doing, was trying to boil it down, make it simple and easy to understand. Because from my perspective, if we want to reduce coercive control and, in my idealistic view, eventually end it. That's right. I have hope for humanity. But if we want to do that, we're going to have to look at it across all contexts. We're going to have to look for we're going to have to understand how the pattern works, and we're going to have to be able to detect it easily and quickly. And right now, there's just not that many models that are simple enough. Steve Hassan has his BITE model. Well, I love that model because it's straightforward, right? Behavior, information, thought, and emotion control, the BITE model. And I was looking to do something similar to that, that would be applicable not just to cults, not just to domestic violence, but all across the board. And so what happened is, while I was preparing for those presentations, I actually had a really awful experience where the county attorney's office in the state that I was living in made the decision to drop the case against my ex, who had stalked me and who had been violating the protective order. And there was a protective order violation case that was in process. And because of COVID, it had been held off for 3 years, and there were just too many cases for them to try. And so they decided, well, we're going to dismiss this case. Well, when I found that out, I was terrified because I was about to speak at these 2 conferences, one nationally, one internationally. And so I woke up in the middle of the night one evening. It was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And my heart was beating out of my chest and I couldn't breathe. And I felt like I was being strangled and suffocated and drowned all at the same time. And I was in that state for at least an hour. And at some point, my brain kicked in and goes, this must be what it's like to die in quicksand. And I went, oh my God. And the next, in that moment, I wasn't thinking, oh, this would be a great model. In that moment, I was like, oh my God, that's why this is so horrible. But the next day when I woke up, I thought, oh, okay. And so that's where the quicksand model came from, because it's metaphorical, which is very easy for people to grasp. It helps you understand what it feels like from the survivor's perspective. And then these other pieces that I put in place with the D's, the E's, the F's, like that just makes it easy to learn and easy to remember. And I figured that's what we're going to need for professionals who don't understand it to be able to grasp it quickly and effectively enough to make a difference.
Hey, that sounds absolutely terrifying and exhausting as well. I mean, do you still feel like you're in a place where you worry about that situation?
I still at times feel like I'm still trapped in quicksand. My ex has custody of my child.
Oh my goodness.
And the systems they're not effectively protecting survivors, and they're especially not effectively protecting survivors' children. And so that is probably that's where I do most of my work right now, is in the family court system, because that's what I see as the biggest impediment to survivors of domestic abuse being able to escape the quicksand. Because what happens in that domain, and it happens in cults as well, you get entrapped in the quicksand, right? You're trapped there. They've used all these psychological tactics, and then they use all these social tactics, and then they use cultural tactics. They're like combining all these different tactics against you. You find yourself sinking and sinking, and the more you try to fight it, the faster you sink, and so the worse it gets. And then what happens is you finally think you've got a foothold on the side of the quicksand, and that you're going to be able to get out, and you file for divorce, and you have no idea that family court is about to throw you back in to the quicksand.
I've heard so many examples of the family court system being exploited by exploitative individuals who understand how to manipulate, to find loopholes, and to use systems to their advantage and to the detriment of the person that they were most likely exploiting the entire time, and the reason for you to be in that system to begin with. And
Exactly.
that shows a massive flaw in the system itself. There are so many people that have told me their personal experiences of American family court. I'm not too sure how it works in different places of the world. I'm not too sure how it works in America specifically, only going by some of the stories that I've been told of kind of parents pitching parents against one another, loads of ad hominem attacks, lots of dog whistling, lots of kind of face-to-face re-traumatization of having to be in the same room as the person that's abused you and coercively controlled you for all of this time. And I don't know if that's the nail on the head, but that kind of feels a lot like what you're explaining here in your personal situation and in the situations that you are also assisting and aiding others with as well.
Absolutely. And, I call it systemic coercive control because it really is, it is wound throughout, it's baked into all of the systems and all the structures that we deal with. And the one big problem, as you so eloquently mentioned, is that these are exploitative individuals. Exploit is one of the E's in my model. It's one of the things they do is they exploit. And the systems are so big and cumbersome, and it takes forever to make any policy change or any law change. And coercive controllers are these individual people, and they can very easily, because they're all, not only can they move so much faster because they're an individual, but they can look at the system and they can see what the system's about to do and watch them make a change. And by the time that change is in place, they have already found a way to exploit a vulnerability the new vulnerability they've found. And so that's one of the things that's incredibly difficult to get ahead of, which is why we need everyone to understand that coercive control is the pattern of oppression. It is the pattern of domination. And we need to all start to see what those tactics and strategies are, so that even if we can't stay ahead of them with law and policy and systems change, we can have individuals within those systems who can see the invisible quicksand, because we have through our awareness raising and our education, have found a way to make that invisible quicksand visible.
Absolutely. You say it's idealistic towards end coercive control. I also have that, on my bucket list. I was talking about jury duty before we hit the record button. I think coercive control probably, at one of the tops of my bucket list. It is idealistic, but educating and informing people on how to identify and tackle coercive control is not idealistic. It's realistic, and it should be something that is happening already. Outside of our circles and our echo chambers and spheres of influence and all of that stuff. It's so frustrating to have a conversation with somebody about cults or domestic violence, domestic abuse, or trafficking, or at CrimeCon, for example, somebody brings up a case about extremists, terrorists, serial killers, and you talk about coercive control without saying those words, and you mention all of the psychological aspects of coercive control, and somebody's like, oh my goodness, I see that now. I talk a lot at CrimeCon about a serial killer called Levi Belfield, and you talk about all of the ways that he would control his former partners. And people would say, oh my goodness, I've never thought about that before. And you say, this is coercive control. But you talk about it in school settings, in work settings. You talk about it in mum and toddler groups. You talk about it in dog walking groups. And you realize all of a sudden that coercive control is something that has always been all around us all of the time. And it's only now being recognized as something that is a systemic issue. You mentioned that a universal systemic issue as well, being tackled better in some places than others, but still not good enough anywhere. And you say that some of the systems that we have are big and cumbersome. They are also patriarchal. So I'm not going to go too far down that road, but I'm just going to throw that out there for all of the listeners, that a big portion of the problem with coercive control is patriarchal systems. And that's where I will end that one before I get on my soapbox.
Well, absolutely, because patriarchal systems are a system of domination where one type of person, and in a patriarchal system, that type of person is the male type of person. But in a patriarchal system, the male person is superior to the female person. And when the whole system is structured along those lines, it makes the coercive control invisible, because we don't see it if we aren't looking for that. We don't, if we're, it's like the water we swim in, right? We don't notice that the water's there because we're just swimming around in it.
Absolutely. And even in consideration of the LGBTQIA plus community, when we think about how gender identity and it's no longer linear, even then, the patriarchal systems still dominate everybody else inside those systems. Some men too, most men too, unless you are that patriarchal figurehead at the top of that system or part of the patriarchal figurehead. So the systems of patriarchy are still in operation, stronger, I would say, when you consider that gender identity and gender association is broader now than it's ever been before. So it's difficult because in one sense you have more liberty and more freedom in how you can be addressed and seen and appreciated in society. And then on the other hand, you're still further oppressed because of those systems that exist. So, I mean, this is what I mean about getting on my soapbox. If I dive into this, I'm never going to come back. And listeners are probably like, don't do it, Casey. We know where this is going.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Exactly. That's it.
With patriarchy, what I keep seeing is that a little bit of advancement is made toward equality. And as that system starts to get a little more equal and a little more equitable, then the old patriarchal system comes in and goes, oh, no, no, no. And there's a huge backlash. And so we're seeing that backlash here in the States with things like reproductive rights, where we get a little bit, we've got Roe v. Wade and women are permitted to obtain an abortion in our country. And we have that set in law. And then, oh, nope, we got to get that under control. And the folks who are the folks with the power tend to be mostly male because we're in a patriarchal system. And so it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge.
Oh, it is. It is. And then you consider the progress with the LGBT community and how that's being threatened by people lobbying in the Supreme Court. And then you look more into the female members of the justices, and then you realize that they're associated with patriarchal and male-dominated cults. So, like, it just boggles the mind. And this is what I mean about coercive control being all around us all of the time, and it's only now being identified as something that exists. Maybe it's been noticed by other academics and researchers and writers in a different way. And this is kind of what the Salford course helps you to identify. But at the same time, I am noticing in even my day-to-day relationships, the way that people talk to each other, the way that people communicate, it's not healthy, it's not good, and it's socialized, it's normalized, and it makes me so uncomfortable now, and there's no going back. That door is wide open now, and it's difficult to navigate, but I feel like the blinds have been lifted, and that in a way is very freeing, because it helps you to be able to help others identify why that language is not appropriate when your partner speaks to you that way, or when your parent speaks to you that way, and all of these things. And I can't even imagine the depths that goes to with all of the work that you're doing, Kate, with all of the different things that you're working on at the moment. And you've mentioned the quicksand model. When I first heard the quicksand model, it was the psychosocial quicksand model, and I think I heard about that in your 2022 talk at the International Cultic Studies Association virtual conference, because I don't think that one was in person.
Yes, it was virtual. You're right. And it was and so my model's name has gone through a few iterations. So it did start out as the psychosocial quicksand model. Then I started to see all these biological ways that coercive controllers oppress. And so I added bio, so that it was biopsychosocial quicksand. Well, the problem is that when you go to trademark a name, it makes more sense to have this very easy to remember. So it's the quicksand model, but really it's based on biological, psychological, sociological, and cultural study. And the tactics that are used go across all these different domains, which is why I haven't just studied what you and I study at Salford, but have gone further into things like, I just came across in the last few months, Rianne Eisler's work on the domination and partnership continuum. And that is a beautiful way to show the distinction between coercive control on the domination end and no coercive control over here on the partnership end. And of course, my whole idealistic thing about ending coercive control, right, is way over here at the very end of the partnership side. And as human beings, we'll probably never get there. But just because we won't get there doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for it.
No, absolutely. And I completely agree with that. I was looking at Margaret Singer's continuum influence, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I do sometimes tend to lean towards the second or third with some of the, and I was like, oh my goodness, of course, that's human nature, and everybody will influence people in certain ways. Positive influence, negative influence, or neutral influence, where there's no good or bad outcome, there is just an outcome. So it's very, it feels very targeted when you start to look into those models. But then I had that moment of thinking, well, I might not be all the way on the left side of this continuum, but by learning about it, I can understand how my behavior can change and how I can try to be further on the left side. So that makes complete sense to me, Kate, in looking at these other models and having those same realizations and wanting to be as far on the positive side as possible. And this is where people say, you're such a liberal, Casey. And some people that listen get offended by that. But I just want human rights for all. What can I say? So you have the quicksand model. You speak at the 2022 ICSA conference, and then you go on to talk at the ICSA conference again in 2023. But you do have your organization, End Coercive Control USA. So where does that fall within this timeline? Did it come in the middle of the conferences, before the Salford course, after the Salford course?
Right. So the organization, I actually started the organization at the end of 2019. So it was before I even went to the University of Pennsylvania's executive leadership program. But it wasn't, I really only started it with a blog, right? So nearly the entire time I was in at the University of Salford, I was mostly just blogging. Okay. But in the end of 2021, when I moved to Connecticut, because Connecticut, as you may know, has Jennifer's Law, which was, I believe they were the third state to codify coercive control in the family code. And so I moved here because I wanted to be in a state where there was a law for coercive control, because I knew I was going to be graduating soon. But so in coercive control started end of 2019, end of 2021, I started taking clients. And that happened mainly because a colleague of mine was overwhelmed with clients and called me up and said, "Hey, when do you finish your master's degree? Because I have a client and I can't take her. Can you take this client?" And I took one client, and then it went from there. My phone has not stopped ringing. But to answer your question about the International Cultic Studies Association conference in 2023, what I presented on at that conference was the research I did for my dissertation. And so you had asked if I created the model as part of the master's program. I didn't exactly create it as part of the program, but I created it while I was in. And so when it came time to do my research, that's what I did my research on. I arranged my research project around the model, and I studied, I used qualitative and quantitative data to look at survivors' responses and professionals' responses to the model, so that I could validate the model and also get feedback on improving it. And so that was fascinating. I interviewed people that were survivors of cults and domestic abuse, and then people who were survivors of both. And then I had professionals who were just professionals, and then I had professionals who were survivors. And so I had a wide group of people looking at the model and giving me feedback. And from that research, was able to see that the more experience a person had of coercive control, in other words, if you were a domestic abuse survivor, you'd have a certain appreciation for the model. If you were a cult-only survivor, you'd have a certain appreciation. But if you had both of those, the appreciation for the model went up. And if you had both of those and you were a professional, that's where the highest scores were for the model. And so that was really validating for me to say, you're really onto something here. And not only are you onto something here, but look at this, how your research and your model is applicable across contexts. It's not just applicable to cults or just to domestic violence. It is a broader, more expanded model of coercive control.
That's amazing. I am planning to do a mixed methods research project myself, and I don't know if you remember what it felt like waiting for those surveys to come back so you could put the data in and see if everything lined up the way you hoped it would. But I'm really nervous and I haven't put my surveys together yet.
Oh, it is so exciting and so scary. I've never done research before. It was my first research study, and it was on my model. So it was just, the whole thing was very transformational, and it really brought home the importance of this issue. And now, like we both keep saying, I see it everywhere. And I know that it's on a spectrum. I know that everybody uses tactics of coercive control from time to time, because we all have internalized the domination idea. We all have grown up in hierarchies of power, right? So all of us have some of that in us. But then there's where it shifts from, minor into, and it goes all the way over to the other end where it gets where it can be extremely dangerous, extremely harmful, and absolutely devastating for anyone who is victimized by that person's level of coercive control.
To have that validation of your model in that academic space must have been life-changing. The way that you're able to have your model and conduct it and get efficacious results in such a low stakes environment is really something that I wanted to focus on in this part of our conversation, because through the University of Salford, there's a level of protection as a student and a researcher, because you go through all of the ethics approval, you have research tutors to guide you through those stages, or hopefully to guide you through those stages. And once you get to that point, any negative feedback or backlash falls onto the university. It doesn't fall onto you as a student. So if you're ever going to conduct a research project like this one, or as your first research project, the best place to do it is in an environment like this. And that's what I meant by low stakes. You know, as a researcher and a student, the stakes are low for you. In terms of getting the results that you want, the stakes are quite high, but you managed to get to that point, and I can't even imagine how that must have felt.
Well, I don't mean to imply that this one research study on my model fully validated the model in research. I felt validated by the outcome. And we didn't have enough people in the study for it to be considered, you know, quote unquote, validated by research. But it was very exciting. And yes, I completely agree to have, especially, you know, my supervisor, Roderick Dubrow Marshall, who runs the program along with his wife, Linda Dubrow Marshall. He was my supervisor, and I can't thank him enough for the amount of effort that he put into assisting me, because we were literally on calls once a week. And because my project was, I took on, I bit off way more than I could chew. And we haven't even, we've only looked at a tiny fraction of the data. There's so much more data left in there, and we're still, we're planning to go back, and we're actually in the process of going back and looking at some of that data. But my hope is that we're going to find some other really juicy tidbits in the data that we haven't looked at yet.
Yeah, that's another daunting prospect of getting all of this data back and being like, okay, so now what analysis do I do? What comparative analysis do I consider? What do I leave out? What do I go back to? What do I exclude? Oh my goodness, I have this whole like thing coming up in the next few months, and it's really exciting to get your personal insights as somebody on the other side of this that's had a successful project. And I hope to also be where you are, where I can say, you know, I mean, either way, I think unless you fail, I think you could say it's a success, because you know that you were either right or wrong, and either way, that informs the field that little bit more on the idea of coercive control. So hopefully I can pass, and then I'll be there with you, Kate, and
I'll be excited. I'll be excited to see your results, and I'd love to read your dissertation, because, you know, we are very young in this field, right? As far as the actual term coercive control, you know, I mean, we've got decades of research, but as far as the term coercive control, and then looking at it across contexts, that we're in the baby stages of this, which is very exciting for me. It is. I'm sure it is for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting, but it's also very difficult to pinpoint a project that you want to run with, because there are just so many different things that you could look at. I think I must have about two or three sides of A4 paper. I'm like, maybe I could look at this, maybe I could look at this, maybe this, because it is such an understudied area at the moment, there really is the potential to look at anything. Pick one particular cult and you could run an entire research project on one element of that group.
Right.
I mean, when you start to take it a little bit further, oh my goodness, the possibilities are endless. And it is exciting, but it's also difficult to feel like the world isn't such a dark place. And you mentioned that some of the material on the Salford course and your own personal educational journey has been triggering at times. And I think sometimes when you exist or bask in all of this really difficult material, it can feel like hopeless.
Yeah.
That there's nothing that we can do. I mean, you have your organization, so you are doing, but sometimes it can feel like this is just all the world is, and it will always be this way. Did you ever have those? I feel like that's quite existentialist. Did you ever have those moments where you thought, like, why is the world such a bad place?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And the more you look at it, the deeper you get into it, the darker it can seem. I feel like I've studied it long enough now, and I've worked with enough clients, and I've networked with enough professionals, and I've been on enough coalitions and task forces, and conferences to start to see the hope.
Right.
Like, to start to see, and one of the things was that book that I just mentioned by Riane Eisler, and I apologize, I can't think of her co-author's name right off the top of my head, but the name of the book that I just read is Nurturing Our Humanity. And it is about the distinctions between the partnership systems and the domination systems. And it so simplifies down, for me, it simplifies down coercive control, even though she doesn't really talk about coercive control. Her book's not about coercive control. But when she defined domination systems and partnership systems, I was like, oh my God, she's talking about coercive control, because that's what coercive control does. It dominates. And the opposite of dominating is partnering, equality, equity, all of that stuff. And so seeing that, and then looking at, like, she and people in her organization are doing trainings to take people from the domination side to the partnership side, right? Well, that is a light at the end of the tunnel. The idea that, okay, it might take us a long time. It's probably not going to happen in my lifetime. It may not happen in my children's or my grandchildren's lifetime, that we really put a big dent in this. But that doesn't mean we can't move the needle.
Right.
And it's like that story about the little kid walking along the beach, and they're picking up starfish, because the whole beach is covered in starfish, and they're picking up starfish, and then they're tossing them in one at a time. And an adult comes up and says to the kid, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm throwing these starfish back in because they're going to die out here on the beach." And the adult goes, "Yeah, but look at all these starfish. You're not even making a dent. You're not making a difference." And the kid looks at him and thinks about it for a minute and picks up another starfish and throws it in and goes, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I made a difference for that one." And that's what I'm trying to do, one client at a time, one conference at a time, one podcast at a time, is to move the needle as much as we can, raise awareness, because we will at some point hit that tipping point where they go from going, "What's coercive control?" to, "Well, of course, that's coercive control."
can feel quite hopeless at times, but I do also feel like there is a change or a shift happening, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is,
Yeah.
where it's coming from, what the cause is, but you can just feel it in conversations and in the work that's happening and in the language used in newspaper articles and media representation. There's something happening that is different to when I first started this work 4 years ago, which is a short space of time. So who knows where we'll be in another 4 years, and that in itself is exciting. And it's important to hold on to those things so that you don't just feel completely hopeless because there are so many bad people in the world. But here we are hoping that things slowly change. And they are. I mean, policy and law reflects that. We just have to keep that momentum going. And the way to do that is through things like End Coercive Control USA. You mentioned that it started off as blogging. How did it change over time? Did it just naturally change, or was there a moment where you said, no, I'm going to change this whole thing right now and turn it into an organization?
Well, for the most part, it happened as far as like the business side of it, where an income started coming in, was when that first client was referred to me. That's and that hadn't really been. I had intended to do expert witness testimony, but I wasn't even. I had never considered doing coercive control assessments of the case and then writing a full report that would then be submitted to the court. I was sort of picturing my participation as an expert witness as just, I'm going to answer questions on the stand about what coercive control is. And so that was a big shift there when I took on that first client and I wrote that first report. And so that's where the majority of my work is going right now. But I want to shift more and more into what I had originally planned to do, which is things like training and turnaround. So I want to be able to train organizations, especially those that are working with survivors in some capacity. So especially courts, therapists, professionals that are in the court system, law enforcement, anyone who touches survivors of any kind, to train them so that they can detect it easier and so that they can intervene more effectively. And then turnaround for like companies and universities and organizations, because as we've said already a dozen times, it's everywhere. And so it's in all of those structures. And when it's there, it does what coercive control does. It creates chaos. It creates trauma. It reduces the return on investment. It decreases your bottom line. It can wreak complete havoc on your entire organization and it can ruin your entire team, right? Yeah. So that's where I really want to be focusing, is in those areas where I can go in and help an organization move those coercive controllers either out or bring them into the fold in a way that they can see that the pattern that they're using is harmful, and to stop doing that and to become part of the team, to partner with their coworkers.
And that's something interesting about the Salford course that brings everything back together, because I've set up an informal study group within the Salford course. There's a small number of us that get together to support one another with assessments and things that can be really difficult on the course. And because it's a completely remote online learning course, we really miss out on that socialization aspect. And so this study group, we get together. We did a Christmas quiz. Sometimes we do parallel play, where you sit together and nobody talks. You just kind of like do your work. Occasionally somebody might say, yeah. So shout out to Jennifer, because that was her bringing parallel play into the study group. But it was also Jennifer that said, we were looking at the Duluth model, which might not mean much to some of the listeners. Patrons, it might do, because I did a big episode on different models around coercive control. We were looking at the Duluth model and the wheel, and then Jennifer said, here's a website that talks about the Duluth maze, which is like some expansion of the wheel. And I was like, what's this website? And I click on it, and what is it? And Coercive Control USA. So there's Kate Amber's website being sent to me. And that's a weird thing that happens in this space. Everything is interconnected and everything comes back to something that you've looked at before. So I'd already connected with you at this point, and we were already in communication when Jennifer sent me your website, which had something about the Duluth maze on it. So yeah, so it just always comes full circle. And that's another really powerful thing that happens in this space, and the sharing of information, and the communication and the networking. It causes this domino snowball effect where the information just goes a little bit further each time. So just having a conversation with somebody about coercive control, you never know how far that's going to go, and you never know what ripple effects that conversation will have. Or reading an article about coercive control, or watching a documentary about a survivor talking about their experiences of coercive control, and then talking to a friend about that documentary. You just never know how far that is going to go. So I just wanted to give you that little story there about how your
Let me say one thing about that, and that is that what you're referring to is the maze of coercive control, which was not actually created by me, but was created by Kathy Jones. And so I want to give credit to Kathy Jones for the maze. I'm actually in the process of creating my own. I have my quicksand model, obviously, but as part of my model, I'm rethinking and recreating a model that'll be sort of a visual, but won't be a wheel and won't be a maze, and it's going to be something a little different. So you can stay tuned. Yeah, that'll come out probably when I publish my book.
Oh, there's so much exciting news in those two sentences. So we have a book to look forward to. We have visual aspects to look forward to, which is really important for different types of learners, survivors that take in information in a different way. I know that I am definitely an aesthetic learner. I say that, I don't know. I think it depends what mood I'm in, because I tend to only learn things if I write them down. So sometimes you'll be in a presentation and somebody will say, don't worry about taking notes because I'll send you the presentation. And then in my head, I'm like, I have to write this down, otherwise I just won't remember it. But then other times, if I see a model or a visual representation of somebody's research, that also is another way that I really tend to take things in. So there's some really exciting things you've just said there. The book, is it memoir? Is it part memoir? Is it educational? Is it, what's it for?
Sure. Yeah, it's not a memoir. It is the same. It is like a book version of what my company is doing, which is to train and to raise awareness and educate people in a visual, metaphorical, and easy. It's very accessible. It's full of graphics, beautifully designed graphics of the concepts, because obviously a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So you get so much more by looking at one picture than you'd get by me putting 10 pages of content out. And so it's going to be mostly a picture book. I mean, there's going to be some text, but it's going to be mostly visuals.
Oh, that sounds amazing, especially after you've read Coercive Control by Evan Stark, which is such a heavy text to read.
It's so good, but it is so academic, right?
Yep. All of those things.
I put this together this way because I needed to simplify it for myself, right? It was so huge and complicated and complex and nuanced, and I needed a way to make it easy And now I want to take that and help professionals to be able to quickly identify it and quickly intervene in a way that's effective, because right now we're just not doing that.
That sounds so good. I feel like when I read Coercive Control, it was my first formal introduction to the subject. I feel like in my interviews with individuals who had come from the armed forces, people who had come from cults, domestic violence and domestic abuse, people that had worked in prisons, the silver thread was there, and I was starting to recognize that it was coercive control. And that happened before I enrolled onto the Salford course, and was probably my inspiration for doing so. And then I read Evan Stark's book, and then I interviewed Evan Stark, who talked about that synonymous relationship of coercive control and domestic partnerships, which was really interesting because in my mind, with all of the work I've done on cults, coercive control and cults, for me, is that same synonymous relationship that I'm now having to kind of get past. So that was kind of interesting in having that conversation with Evan. And then I read John Atack's Opening Our Minds, and I wish I'd have read that first. It felt like a great introduction to the subject of coercive control. And to have a picture book with explanations to go along with that, it would be like 1, 2, 3. This is where you start with Kate Amber's amazing new picture book. Explanations, texts, really accessible, breaks it down in a way that doesn't put you off. So I feel like if you didn't know anything about the subject and you weren't thinking of studying the subject, pick up Evan Stark's book would just be like, oh, I don't know about that. It is an amazing book. It's amazing and it's vital, but it's hard. So to have your book and then kind of John's book in the middle and then Evan's book on the end, you've got that's it. You've got the series. You know everything.
Oh, well, I am honored to have you place me in that line.
So we've talked about your quicksand model, your Salford experiences and your research, and Coercive Control USA, which is now an organization, the work that you're doing with expert witness testimonies, working with individuals that have experienced coercive control, and businesses in hopes to change the behaviors of certain aspects of businesses, and a book that's on its way. There can't be anything else, surely.
Well, I also work on some task forces and some coalitions, because I'm trying to make sure that as I complete my model and as I write my book, that I really bring in all of the important aspects, all of the critical pieces of the pattern, and because it does show up a little differently in each context, right? It's the same pattern, but there are little pieces that are a little different and that are important to include. And so I participate in a Voices Committee, which is a group of survivors who help to inform domestic violence shelters how to best serve survivors. So I'm on this survivor committee. I'm also on a couple of coalitions. There are, in addition to trying to pass coercive control laws in the U.S., there are other types of laws that are really important to coercive control. Statute of limitations laws, so that victims who were victimized younger have an opportunity to file suits by having the statute of limitation increased. We do not have consent codified in our law in the U.S., and I believe that if we just got a federal law that codified consent, that's going to take care of a lot of these issues legally right off the bat. Because what coercive control does is it's an ongoing consent violation. So, and then there are custody laws, and there are other laws like gun laws that are really important, because coercive controllers, your risk of being murdered if you're in a if you have been in a domestic abuse relationship, your risk of being murdered is increased 75 times if your perpetrator has access to a firearm. So there's all these laws that are connected to. And so I'm trying to bring in all of these really important issues together so that when people go through the book, they can see it wherever it is, right? Because right now, mostly what's happening is there are people who are talking about it inside cults, and people who are talking about it inside domestic abuse and human trafficking and gangs, but they're not, we're siloed. And there's an enormous amount of informed learning that people have collected. There's a ton of data and research that have been collected in all these things that people think of as disparate, but really we can bring these all together, and that's how we're really going to make an impact. So I'm dabbling in a lot of areas, including I'm also a research associate at the University of Salford. So, and I haven't done any research as a research associate yet, other than just pulling more data from my own research project. But that's another thing I want to really be more deeply involved in, is the research, because as you know, we need to know what we're counting. If we're going to be doing quantitative data, well, what are we counting? What are we measuring? And up until the invention of the term coercive control, and it was invented in the 80s, but nobody really knew what it was until Stark's book came out, right? That's when the term came forward. And so we need to have much more research done, so that we can really fill out all of these models and really make an impact on the systemic structures that currently are holding coercive control in place and are allowing for victims to be trapped in that quicksand, unable to escape.
And to expand the laws that exist on coercive control universally as well, in the same space, all of it in one go.
Yes, because that's, first of all, there's hardly any laws, right? I mean, we've got the UK law, Australia's passing a law, we've got Canada put a law into their family code, we've got 5 or 6 states now in the US that have a coercive control law. But that's a tiny fraction of the world that even has it codified. And it's only codified under domestic violence or domestic abuse. We badly need, and efforts for psychological safety in the workplace. So there are things happening in the US for anti-bullying legislation. There's the Psychological Safety Workplace Act or something, and there's the Anti-Bullying Act, and all of these things together. I think that's what you're feeling when you say that you feel something happening, something shifting. I think what you're feeling is that maybe we've only all made a teeny bit of progress across the board, but because we're all starting to make progress across the board, and if we start shoving all that stuff together, it really is starting to make an impact.
Yeah. But in that same breath, talking about psychological safety and bullying at work, in my head, I'm just like, well, that's coercive control. So I'm back there again. Like everything's just taking me back there.
Right.
And everything's together but separate, but it needs to be enmeshed. And once it's enmeshed, we can all rest a bit easier. That's how I feel. But then again, I'm just at the tip of the iceberg right now. I am not as deep into this rabbit hole as you are at the moment. I imagine your whole life just feels like CC all over the place. Coercive control here, there, everywhere. Every waking moment is coercive control in one form or another.
Yeah, it really does feel like that a lot of the time. But when you say that you're only on the tip of the iceberg, I am too. I mean, if you look at what other people know about coercive control, you and I know a lot more, right? Like what, like we're at expert level when you compare us to the rest of the world. But there is still so much more. I keep buying books and they keep going on my shelf while I'm trying to work on my book. And there's a lot to it. There's a whole lot to it, but we're pulling together. And if we can get all that information all moving in the same direction, we're going to be able to make a change to these structures that have been, systemically patriarchal, systemically hierarchical, and systemically oppressive for, probably thousands of years.
When I attended book club, there's a cult book club, very informal. We just pick a book each month, read it, and then tell each other our thoughts. When we chose Cults in Our Midst for book club one month, Janja Lalich, a co-author of the first edition of Cults in Our Midst, joined us.
Wonderful.
To hear our thoughts on the book and to tell us some anecdotes about Margaret Singer, which was just absolutely wonderful. And she expressed the same sentiments that you've just expressed there around bringing everything together, expanding legislation across various different domains and platforms, and changing how coercive control is recognized, how it is tackled, how recovery methods adapt to what we are continuously learning about the nature of coercive control and its various manifestations and all of these things. So hearing from expert individuals doing very similar but very different work in the arena of coercive control and hearing the same sentiments gives me again that little spark of hope that everything in this space is moving in the right direction. And I think that that's just a wonderful place to wrap up our conversation and ask you to tell everybody where they can find all of your work.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. So the easiest way to find anything about me is to go to my website. You can go to quicksandmodel.com. And from there, you can get to the resources page, which I've got a gazillion resources in a ton of different contexts for lots of different survivors of different types of coercive control. My blog's on that site. My research page talks a little bit about my model. And you can even register on that site for a complimentary consultation if you either are a survivor who's going through some kind of court case and you need an expert, whether that be an expert witness or an expert consultant, or if you are with some type of organization, whether you work with survivors or not, but if you want to address coercive control in your organization, then you can get a free consultation with me to look at a turnaround program for your company or your school or university or whatever group that you're a part of.
I will make sure that I put all of the links to Kate's work in the episode description. And if anybody would like to reach out to Kate, I'm sure they can also do that through your website.
Absolutely.
In case there is anything that you would like to learn more about from our short conversation today, or any of the work that Kate does that you would like to inquire about in terms of support around coercive control and family court, or when your book comes out, do you have any idea on a publication date?
Oh my gosh, it keeps moving.
Well, as soon as you know, you let us know, and then I will let the listeners know, and we'll make a big thing of it because it's definitely something to celebrate. And I will be asking for my own signed copy as well.
Oh, I would love to send you a signed copy of my book when it gets published. It was so much fun talking with you. Thank you so much for having me. Your podcast is fabulous, and I can't wait to read your dissertation and hear the results of your research.
Thank you so much for joining me, Kate. I was so glad that we were finally able to find a time to sit down and have this conversation, especially because parts of our journey are enmeshed, to use that word again, through the Salford course and through our work on coercive control. And I'm really excited to let you know if I pass or fail.
I'm sure that you'll do great.
I'm laughing, but I don't know whether I should be crying. I don't know at this point. But I so appreciate you and your time and all of the things that you are doing in the world to combat coercive control. You're a woman wearing 50, 60 different hats, and it's inspirational, and I so appreciate it, and I'm sure so many others do as well. So thank you so much, Kate, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. It's been an honor. Take care.
Take care. Bye.